Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Tea and Chocolate. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing a dear friend. Her name is Tina Schomburg. And today's topic is the courage to rewrite your own narrative. So I'm inviting Tina today to share her story, and some other interesting things will probably pop up within the conversation and how it relates to this hot little topic today. So thanks, Tina, for joining me.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and chat with you.
Thank you. So the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Oh my goodness. Where does this story even start, right? We're talking about rewriting a story. It's like, which story was in place first of all? So I guess we'll start really where my story obviously didn't begin. It didn't start there, but it certainly got really interesting when I turned 21 and I got cancer. Not something that I expected. At the same time, also not fairly surprising in hindsight. We're like just looking at my life and sort of how I was living it, my lifestyle on the external, let alone how I was treating myself internally, you know, too. And so that was 10 years ago. And that's when the journey for me really began of understanding, of realizing that there actually is a story that's playing in the background of my life, that's dictating a lot of things of what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing externally. And the last 10 years, I have spent a lot of time going inwards and understanding sort of who we are and why we do what we do. And I find that very, very interesting, and I'm very grateful. You know, it's interesting with cancer. It's one of those things where it's I find a very divided space where, you know, so for me, for example, when I was diagnosed, there was this intuitive feeling of chemotherapy is not for me. And I didn't even know where that feeling came from. It was just like, boom, it was right there. I learned a little bit of what chemotherapy is. And at the time, I already knew that my body was very toxic just based on what I was putting into it at the time. So fighting a toxin with a toxin for me personally didn't make sense at the time. Now that's a very personal choice. And so I decided to move to Costa Rica for a year and a half to pursue some alternative healing methodologies. And by alternative, I mean what people also call natural methods.
So Tina, could you not have done that here?
I could have, definitely. Okay. For some reason, I thought it was important for me to be in a blue zone. So I literally Googled blue zone and Costa Rica came up.
That's incredible.
That's where I ended up with my partner at the time.
That's incredible.
Yes. It's looking back, it's like, what were you thinking, Tina?
Well, I mean, that in itself is, like you said, you don't know how you knew, but you just knew. And I think that's important to point out to people listening to today, is as we move along in the interview, is listening to your own guidance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm so impressed with that with you. It's incredible.
Honestly, I think the language I'm using is pretty indicative of what was happening at the time. When I say I don't know what I was thinking, it's because I wasn't thinking. I was feeling, I went with my gut on it. And now in hindsight with my brain, you know, thinking about it, it's like, wow, you know, I was stage 3, 4. I mean, my cancer was in the lymphatic system, so it was Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was in several different places. So it had, you know, moved around already, which is never a good sign. So for me to make that decision, I'm very grateful that my brain kind of farted out in that moment and my heart took over.
Did you have people around you, like, sort of putting in their own opinions, or oncologists telling you what you ought to do at that point in time?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My oncologist or hematologist I had, because it was lymphoma and leukemia, or sort of blood diseases. So hematologist was against it, and said she wouldn't be able to support me medically going forward if that's the route that I was choosing, only if I chose to do chemotherapy. And my family physician, thankfully, he would try to talk me out of it, but he also wanted to make sure that I had what I needed. And we sort of made a deal that in a year and a half, if there was whatever I was doing showed progress or decline in my CT scan, which I committed to him and to my family and friends, then I would consider chemotherapy again. And that did happen.
Right. You went through chemotherapy after the fact, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not how I expected things to go, because so in that year and a half, everything I was doing based on this, in a year and a half, my cancer only grew 0.03 millimeters. So you could say that it hadn't grown really.
Right.
And that's pretty incredible for being that later stage, and that long span of time without any medical intervention except the food that I was eating and the herbs that I was drinking, pretty much. But the thing is, when your entire life changes so drastically, going from drinking, smoking, work to we're going to cut everything out of the diet. First of all, we're going to go vegan, no alcohol. I mean, cold turkey, my life. That's a hard thing to do. And everything was going so fast too. So after a year and a half of just living a really, what I perceived at the time to be a restrictive lifestyle, I was so done. I was so done with it. I literally was just like, you know what, just hook me up to the IV now, because I can't sustain this lifestyle. I always like to say I was emotionally, spiritually, mentally drained. My physical body was like in top shape besides the cancer, but that was sort of, where I was at the time.
Can you tell me what specific things, if you can share that, in that year and a half, what you actually did to help support yourself?
Yeah, I started out on the Gerson therapy, which is one of the more common alternative cancer therapies.
Which is a juicing therapy, isn't it?
Yeah, 12 juices a day, which you have to make on your own too. It's not like you're just really buying juice. I mean, that would cost a fortune too, but
yes.
A lot of very labor intensive therapy. So juicing, coffee enemas were a big part of that, as well as a couple of recipes to incorporate food-wise into the plan.
During your time there doing that, the Gerson therapy, what was your emotional state, given the fact that you are withdrawing, in a sense, from the alcohol, the various forms of addiction that you've, may I say that?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was withdrawing and I was grieving, really, but there was no time for it. I went into straight survival mode, and in a way that served me at the time, most definitely, because it got me to do really radical things and make radical changes in my life.
Okay.
And for me, there also was this story going on of, I had read a lot about, at this point now, sort of into the journey about alternative medicine and about the healthcare system and the medical system we have in the West and big pharma and you name it. I mean, I dove in, and there's a lot of conspiracies within that as well, but I don't even want to go into it all, to say I was very much into alternative health, very much against the medical system that we have here in place as it is. And so my mind was so fixed on, this has to be the way, I have to make it work. There was no flexibility around that. So I just made it work.
When did fear kick in, or did it?
No.
Ever?
No. I never thought I was going to die throughout that time, honestly. And the fear I honestly, I've only learned how to really feel and be in my body in the last 3 years. Prior to that, I was really, really good at thinking my way out of feelings. So if fear came up, I was really good at just suppressing, like not even letting it come up. So when I say I didn't have any fear, there probably was fear. I just, as soon as it came, I did this because I didn't have time. I didn't have the capacity or the tools or the resources or the support network in order to deal with it. And I'm really thankful in a way to myself for having that coping mechanism, because I think it would have been too much.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the oncologist for a minute. I'd like to delve into what you're saying, but the oncologist who denied you of services, did you go back? Did you return to the same oncologist when you returned from Costa Rica?
No, I was referred to a different oncologist. I had done some research in terms of who I wanted as my oncologist,
Yes.
and I asked my physician, my family physician, to refer me to that person.
I see. Okay. What did that tell you about this individual's position on your choice?
You know, I wish that the system was a little more flexible in supporting people in making different, in offering different options, you know, and making different decisions. Having said that, I don't think that that's the case. Although I will also say, in the last, since I was diagnosed and going through it, you know, I'm still educated and informed as to what's going on within the cancer realm and within the medical system. And I understand and I hear that oncologists are more supportive of complementary alternatives.
Yes.
And I understand that they also have their hands tied. So it is what it is.
Yes, it's a catch-22, I think, that the position that they're in. And I mean, there's some that really hold their opinions, and it is what it is. I want to go back to the fear and the suppression. At that point, you had gone through, your chemotherapy. And at what point did you start really delving into what's this cancer really all about for you?
Well, actually, the fear that I was more suppressing prior to chemotherapy, because I was so focused on the physical body and cleansing it. And once I said yes to chemotherapy, there actually was this huge relief, this huge burden had lifted, because I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to be this poster child for alternative therapies. And
Understood.
I had a lot of resistance towards it not working, because that was the story I was telling myself and
Right.
what I needed to live up to.
Yeah.
Not a very kind thing to do to yourself, but that's where I was at, and that's okay. So once chemotherapy, I said yes. It was a relief. And with that, I understood that the next 6 months was going to be chemo doing its thing. So there naturally was more time for me to actually focus on what was happening and what just happened in the last year and a half. And so I started to journal again too, and doing things that with a bit more downtime allowed me to listen to the thoughts that were coming up and the emotions that were coming up. And that was a difficult journey for sure, because all of a sudden you do have grief. I did have grief around losing that identity. You know, it's not like I choose, like nobody else who gets cancer chooses to have their life changed upside down, which it so often does, right? So I think there's something to be said about creating safe containers for people to grieve who are going through cancer. And that's something that I do now, you know, of just making sure that they understand that that's also okay to feel those things.
Yes, this is your profession you're speaking about right now, aren't you?
Yes.
Like part of your
Mm-hmm.
profession. Um, because that you've gone through the experience, What kind of things would you say requires us to take a look at? What I mean by that is the way we approach it or the way we approach life. What needs to change in your perspective?
Well, what I always find quite unfortunate, where I'm always like, who designed this whole thing called life? Um, is that we often, in order to actually have a more profound change correction in our life, we need these wake up calls. And often that comes in form of something that's really, can be really traumatic in a way in its own right. Literally a shakeup of the entire sort of what you thought life was about, you know? So I will say, first of all, that's I have a lot of compassion, and I used to say that cancer was a gift, and then somebody who was 23 and died of cancer, she said, you know, cancer is not a gift, and cancer was a wake-up call, and I can resonate with that deeply too, you know. It's not something that I would wish upon somebody, but having said that, I can be grateful for it also because it did shake up a lot of things for me. Now, as of what were the things that came as a result, like how am I different with myself, I'm a completely, of course not at the core, but like the layers of who I am and who I've become are significantly different than what I used to be and what I used to stand for, and how I used to treat myself and how I used to treat other, how I used to see the world. Everything's completely changed as a result of that one incident.
Mm. What's your relationship to death today?
I am a huge advocate for having more conversations about death. I think that's one of the superpowers, I will say, that people who have faced hardship, like real hardship, where their death was actually at jeopardy, have going for them. With death comes a certain amount of depth from my experience. And depth can be a really challenging thing when the surrounding doesn't support depth, but still it gives you a different understanding of what life is about. All of a sudden, the things that we used to think are big deals are no longer such big deals, you know. And oftentimes it's people who've lived through hardship who remind the people around them who maybe haven't had hardship, that is so. So for me, death from day one of cancer has been a huge ally, and I continue to. I've In the last 3 years, I dove deeper into the subject of death and my relationship to death than I actually thought I might. But there was always this call of, this is something to look straight at. This is not something to turn away from. You know, I always like to say that my capacity to experience sorrow and grief coincides with the degree of that I can experience joy and beauty and love in this world. And so I will do whatever it takes, and I will face whatever it takes within myself in order to experience the things that I really want to experience and I want to give myself. You know, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this was a really beautiful reminder of that. And I often, if somebody is stuck sort of in their own way, or I'll just speak for myself, if I'm stuck or I need clarity about certain things, or I go down a path of chronic complaining all of a sudden, and I find myself in these phases of feeling misaligned within myself, I will foreshadow to death. I will be like, what if I die tomorrow? And what's important is the feeling that I get in the moment of like, and sure enough, someone will be like, the regrets, right? Should have done that. Or, you know, for a while, I didn't even know what joy was in this whole process of, when I was around 26, I was like, what is this joy? I mean, I had cancer. I was told I was cancer free, and I'm still like, life, yeah, it's okay. Like, where's the joy that people are talking about? And death is definitely one of those things that I think will motivate us in order to do things that we maybe normally wouldn't. So let's have more conversations about it.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk a little bit about how cancer streams into our culture
Mm.
and our societies, and how, the way we speak about it? I think sometimes, my observation about cancer is, first of all, it's got this big name behind it, when there's so many other things that people could be also focusing on. So I find that really interesting. And how we feel this need to fight it. And then if dying comes along, it's like we've just betrayed ourselves and everybody else around us. And that we don't have the permission, we don't give ourselves permission to die.
Mm.
And nor the people around us. We constantly say, but he or she, fought until the end. Well, there isn't really anything to fight, unfortunately. Can I get your perspective on that? Because I just gave you my opinion.
Yeah, no, and we know each other, and I do feel the same way
Mm-hmm.
about it. That was one thing when I was diagnosed with cancer. That was a real pain point of Googling about cancer, and there is all of this battle language, the fight on cancer, and it's a battle, and you need to kill it, and all of these things. And that never resonated with me. I was like, in my body, it's part
Right.
of me. Why would I declare war on it? That doesn't even make any sense.
Very
And
interesting.
yeah, and I bonded with some really incredible friends that I'm still friends with who had cancer, where we're all like, what the heck is that all about? And yeah, which just shows me that there's room for different messages out there. And I know that some organizations are pivoting away from the battle language as well, which I so appreciate as well. But there's more work to be done. And I will also say that because it is all about the fight, and the goal is about being cancer free or having a cure for cancer, like you said, there is not room for those who are terminal, those who are late stage, those who they will have to face death. And that, like you said, is not a defeat in any way. And nobody should ever be made to feel like their loss against cancer is a defeat.
Yeah.
I'm so with that, and my heart goes out to everyone who experiences that marginalization and that stigma around it, because it's painful. It's really painful.
What does that tell us or tell you about our level of emotional intelligence? If we as a culture are unable to do that for ourselves and for others, where does that leave us in our EQ or the emotional EI?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I've been having a lot of conversation about the state of the world that we're in. And
Right.
it certainly seems like I can't take credit for this way of thinking. I know a lot of people have talked about this, where technology has advanced so much and we haven't matured emotionally with it. And so we are now addicted to our phones because we don't have the emotional maturity to actually understand its use and allow it to be actually a tool, not a master, which it is to most of us, technology. And it's not just our phone, it's everything. So yeah, I think there's something to be said about us needing to have more conversations about emotions, about the wide range of emotions, because we look on social media and what is it? It's positive vibes only, perfection only. And that's not a true demonstration or illustration of what life is all about. It's you just look to nature, and it's not all the trees in the forest are erect a lot of them have fallen over and they're dying or decaying, you know. And I think we've moved away so far from nature also, within, like, externally, like nature, we're not connecting to nature anymore because we're
Certainly.
constantly in these, in this different reality.
Yeah, yeah.
And that also reflects within ourselves. We're not connected to
Right.
our emotions, to our feelings. Like, I really mean it when I said I only learned how to connect to my feelings and be in my body 3 years ago, when I started to go deeper and more inwards, and looking at some of the things that externally I was told, not told, but it certainly seemed like I should be ashamed of these things that don't fit into this perfect mold of what a human being should look like and behave like. And so to reconcile that with myself and to detach from this narrative, this cultural narrative of perfection and ableism and privilege, and to give myself permission to go inwards in order to feel what there is to feel. And that includes anger, that includes, you know, frustration, that includes sadness, that includes all of the, you know, wide range of emotions that we have. I think that's a really courageous thing to do, and I applaud everyone who takes hold of that, you know, talking about narrative now, right? Takes hold of their own story and not just blindly follow the norm of what we're being told we need to fit into. I think that's a very courageous thing to do and takes a lot of courage. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also, and when we do like technology and social media, I think that we, on some level, have become less tolerant of each other's differing views. And I don't know, I mean, I see it all the time, and I'm not quite sure how to, for myself, even to find the balance and all that, right? Because those things are very triggering. And, you know, getting back to the emotions, what you were talking about is a concern, like even like, well, for me, and how we are relating to each other, particularly in these interesting times. And I think, you know, there's, you know, the two words that are really interesting to me are privilege and silence. And there are levels and complexities of those two words, because those two words are being used often. And the thing that really has, I thought about before you and I came on today, was the silencing, and how, in fact, I'm wondering if there's going to be a pocket of people that feel silenced that yet create another level of dis-ease. Not being able to use our voices.
Yeah, it's a really, really challenging time right now for everyone. I really think so, you know, regardless of your social standing, you know, or your demographic or your color. Like, I can just say that I think all of us are having a hard time. Having said that, there's obviously layers and degrees. Like, some have it way worse, of course, and not worse. They're more challenged by this, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, I've been challenged too in navigating through that, especially as somebody who still lurks on social media and is sort of active and also wants to contribute to a conducive conversation that would steer us in the right direction of reconnecting to our humanity and our commonalities, for sure. Having said that, I think right now it's almost like everything is just being shook up, you know, just like a snow globe. All of the crap that really, I mean, no race should be treated as less than another race. You know, we do have these hierarchies. There's no, you know, there's no denying that there's hierarchies, right? And that should have never been the case to begin with. Right. So but you know, we're like, you know, the people of privilege are like, well, but I have it good. There's a really interesting Charles Eisenstein. He talks a lot about this, like the separation, you know, and he speaks of it in nature too. For example, the whales go extinct. It's like, Yeah, that's kind of crappy, but it doesn't really affect my well-being. So I can like
Mm.
hold up posters and say I'm not for it, but really I'm not engaged that much in it, in changing the outcome of that extinction potentially. And I find that really interesting. And so honestly, what I think is just like all of these things that we've just been like, don't need to look at that because I'm okay. It's just like, and over generations and generations, it's just like being shook up. And we now have to look at this of the inequalities, that are in this world, of the pain, of the discomfort that some humans are feeling, and then our own discomfort and all of that too, of holding space for that, of being able to say, you know what, I have faced real hardship and challenges in this life, and you know what, so did somebody else, and because of their race, yes, I can see how maybe their challenges were different and maybe even more intense because of the way that the structure of the system is designed. And both are true. And we're not, what I think is the challenge right now that's happening is that there's a lot of taking sides. And so we're not actually having, and again, Charles Eisenstein, I think, is somebody to look to right now in this conversation because he goes a little deeper into the root system of what we're seeing. Racism is right here. Dis-ease is right here. I've always been a proponent and an advocate for going deeper into the issue. I have cancer. I had cancer. Okay, so I can treat it with chemotherapy. I can treat it with foods. I can treat it with whatever floats my boat, but ultimately what's underneath it, and I've gone into sort of the root network of my cancer and what it's represented for me, challenges and opportunities. And I think with all of these conversations that we're having on that layer of surface outwards, I think there's an opportunity to go deep into the rooted system of our humanity and our nature and look at how disconnected we are from ourselves, from each other, and from nature, and go from there.
And
And
this
those
is where, yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, and this is where you feel it's all relatable in that manner.
yes, I think there's I don't think anything happens by coincidence. I don't feel that way in my own life. If I even just look back and sort of see how the dots are connected, and it's always easier to do that in hindsight, of course, right? But I have a deep trust that everything is connected in my life, and I do have a certain trust and understanding that that's also externally what is happening. And personally, the amount of crap that's come up around my own biases and the way I even treat myself that was brought up because of COVID, the pandemic, and the racism conversations that are arising, I say thank you. I'm like, let's bring it. Let's have more of these tough conversations. I think it can serve us too. So that's where I'm at. I have a lot of questions. I don't have a lot of answers at this point, and the I don't know attitude could actually be a good thing for all of us to try on sometimes.
Yeah, you and me both. I mean, I have lots of questions, and I like to, I guess, look into various narratives, and maybe that's a left brain approach, like being like a critical thinker. And so I think, the combination of both, of being critically, like looking at something at a deeper level, but also incorporating some empathy in there.
Absolutely. And
Um,
people have asked me that before because I have sort of alluded to the fact that I think there's deep rooted issues and systemic issues in the way that we are as a collective and as individuals. And we need to look at the individual within all of us first. It's always like, we need to heal ourselves before we can heal the world. I really do believe that because I've seen that in my own microcosm also of like, the changes that have happened within me, within my own life, they have affected the microcosm, my family system, the people that are around me. My life has changed externally as a result of what's happened in here.
mm,
And so I think if we all just focus on going inwards also, and just looking what's here, what's been neglected. I do think we're all wounded. And I don't think that racism would exist if we can accept our own fallacy, our own mortality, our own insecurities, all of it. I just don't think that racism would exist, honestly, but that's a long journey ahead. That's a really long journey in undoing generations of pain and trauma and rebuilding trust of the people that we have also neglected, us included.
I think that's the one, like the message I'm not really, how do I say that? I'm not really an advocate of identity politics. I'm more about what's the person's character, what's their merit, that kind of stuff. Because I think when you're using someone's identity, when they start saying white, blah, 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 or, indigenous or black person, etc., then we start to kind of create divisiveness. That's just this is what I'm experiencing, or at least that's kind of, I'm not sure if we're taking the right approach with this all. This is the questions that I have, because, after the World War II, if a German person immigrated to Canada, had a very different experience than an Italian person that immigrated to Canada, and they're both experienced hardship in their own way. I mean, let's, you and I have that actual descent. We have that, yeah. And so I think there's something to be said about a lot of what you said, and as well as family systems.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, I do think that separation and divisiveness is not conducive to healing. I think we need to acknowledge each other's pain 100%. I feel that, in the healing of everything anyways, just from experience also, it's interesting with cancer, what I've found is that one of the deeper layers is there is emotional pain. There's the physical disease, but what I find most often also is just underneath this is so much trauma and so much pain of everything that they've lived through in life that has not been acknowledged. And I do think that physical illness is tied to trauma in a way too. I'm not saying that's the only cause, and I'm not saying you can heal yourself by rewriting your belief system. I'm not going to make those claims. Didn't work for me. Is it possible? 100%. Are those unicorns? Most likely, but it's a good conversation to have anyways. Like, we do need to look at our belief system, of course, anyways, but all I'm trying to say is that, there is this underlying trauma and this wound and these hurts that we have. And I think that's for a lot of us. And acknowledging can be so powerful from human to just be like, holy crap, you've lived through things. I see that. I feel that. Do you want to talk about it? Can I hold space for you? Why don't we have those conversations more? Their pain does not take away from my pain. Their pain, in fact, giving them permission to share their pain in a way also gives me more permission to show up for my own pain too. So I'm all for acknowledging each other's pain and not creating a competition around it.
Mm-hmm. I think to sort of close, if you have any lasting thoughts besides the ones that you've just articulated, I think that today's discussion, what stood out for me today is, just following your own voice, and, really to have the courage to go inside and do some real deep reflection on your life and what your story is, and why you've come here, and what is it that you want to give its full expression. And part of that is the cancer journey.
Well said. Yeah. If anyone, and the thing is, if anyone is struggling to find a support system in order to support them in that work of going inwards, because it is still difficult to find people that can hold space for pain. I would say that many people have a hard time with it. But I know there's a lot of souls, there's a lot of people also ready to have these uncomfortable conversations and just need safe spaces. And if there's anyone listening, that I'm always open for conversations. There are many, many beautiful circles starting to open up where people are sharing and expressing themselves and learning to discover their own story and how it ties in with every single thing. Yeah, I'm open for more conversation and support that.
Yeah, and certainly, regardless of what one feels about the George Floyd situation, because it was traumatic for everybody. And I guess what you're saying is that it feels like it's almost a catalyst to have uncomfortable conversations.
Absolutely.
You
And
know,
uncomfortable conversations we need to continue to have. They're here to serve all of us. I really trust and believe that.
yeah. Well, Tina, thank you so much
Thank
for being
you.
with me today. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm very grateful for this chat today and sharing all of what you have today. And thank you so much for being you. And if anybody wants to be in touch with Tina, just write a little note below this message and I'll be sure to get it to Tina. So thanks again for joining me today on Tea and Chocolate.
I love the name.
Thank
Two
you.
of my favorite things.
Yeah, me too. Me too. All right, everybody, take good care of yourselves and have a wonderful summer. And this is coming to you from Vancouver. All righty, take good care. Thanks again.